Fashion. It's a word we throw around lightly these days. Runways, influencers, fast trends. But fashion, my friend, is far older and far more revealing than most people realize. You see, the story of clothing is really the story of us, of power, beauty, shame, and the strange dance between what we choose to hide and what we dare to show. Let's turn back the pages of time, long before Paris became the world's style capital, before corsets and crinolines, even before the word fashion meant what it does today. Because once upon a time, the body itself, yes, the human body, was the ultimate canvas for expression. In ancient Greece, beauty wasn't about hiding the body, it was about celebrating it. The Greeks saw the human form, especially the nude form, as something divine. Their gods and heroes were carved in marble, muscles taut, skin flawless, each curve and sinew a hymn to perfection. To them, nakedness was not shameful, it was sacred. Then came Rome, borrowing Greek ideals, but adding its own flair for luxury and spectacle. Roman women wrapped themselves in silk imported from China, shimmering and translucent. To wear such finery was to flaunt one's wealth, and yes, sometimes one's figure. But even in Rome, modesty had its place. The matron's stola, a long concealing gown, symbolized virtue and respectability. So from the very start, what we wore wasn't just fabric, it was a message. And then came the fall. As Christianity spread through Europe, the body became a battleground between sin and sanctity, between temptation and restraint. The early church fathers preached modesty, humility, the covering of flesh. A woman's hair, once a symbol of beauty, became something to veil. The body, once divine, was now a reminder of original sin. So for centuries, the human form disappeared beneath layers of wool, linen, and moral judgment. Fashion became not about freedom, but about control. In the Middle Ages, clothing told everyone exactly who you were and who you were not. The church, the nobility, even the local guilds, they all dictated what could be worn. These were the sumptuary laws, early dress codes meant to preserve social order. Velvet and silk for the noble, rough homespun for the peasant. Women were expected to cover their hair with wimples and veils, their bodies wrapped in high-necked gowns. Showing too much skin was not just frowned upon, it was seen as indecent, even dangerous. After all, it wasn't just about beauty, it was about virtue. And virtue, in those days, meant concealment. Yet, human nature never really stays buried, does it? Underneath those modest layers, whispers of rebellion began to stir. In the late medieval courts, women began loosening their sleeves, softening their silhouettes, lowering their necklines just a little. And that little was enough to scandalize priests and poets alike. Yes, even then, fashion had a way of pushing the limits, 1 inch of neckline at a time. Then, somewhere around the 15th century, something miraculous happened. Europe began to wake up from its long medieval sleep. The Renaissance, rebirth, swept across the continent like dawn breaking over stone towers. Artists rediscovered ancient Greek ideals of beauty,
Philosophers praised the human mind, and painters like Botticelli and Van Eyck rediscovered the human body. Suddenly, being beautiful, being seen, was not sinful, it was civilized. Courtly life became a theater of splendor. Kings and queens dressed like living paintings, draped in brocade, pearls, and precious stones. The body was once again a statement of status, not shame. But perhaps nowhere did this rebirth play out more dramatically than in France, under the reign of Charles VII. And at the center of it all, a woman named Agnès Sorel. Before Agnes entered the picture, even the most fashionable ladies of the French court wore bodices that covered their chests. Yes, necklines might dip modestly, but never too far. A hint of cleavage was daring. A glimpse of the breast was unheard of. Then came Agnes, young, luminous, and utterly fearless. When she appeared at court, the room stopped breathing. Her gowns were works of art, square-cut necklines plunging so low that her breasts, smooth, pale, perfectly shaped, were fully visible. No pretense, no veil, no apology. To some, it was indecent. To others, divine. But one thing was certain, no one could look away. The mistress of the king had transformed her body into a statement of beauty, of power, of audacity. And soon every noble woman in France was whispering her name and imitating her style. So, what changed? Why did a society so bound by modesty suddenly embrace the exposed breast as fashionable? Because, as history shows us, fashion always reflects what a culture values most. In this new age of art and enlightenment, the body was no longer the enemy of the soul, it was its mirror. Painters celebrated it, poets praised it, and noble women wore it, boldly, as proof of their divine beauty and social power. In a way, the Renaissance didn't just rediscover art, it rediscovered the body itself. And that's where our story truly begins, in the glittering candlelit halls of the French court where beauty and power mingled, and one woman dared to bear what no one before her would. In the next chapter, we'll meet Agnès Sorel, the king's mistress, the muse of painters, and the woman who made the human body fashionable once more. But remember, fashion never just changes what we wear. It changes how we see ourselves.
In the 15th century, France stood between ruin and rebirth. The 100 Years' War still scarred the land, and the royal court was a fragile island of wealth amid a sea of unrest. But amid this turbulence, a woman appeared who would redefine not just beauty, but power itself. Her name was Agnès Sorel. Agnès was born around the year 1422 in the small village of Fromenteau, far from the marble floors and jeweled halls of royalty. Her beginnings were modest, yet she possessed something rarer than noble birth, a brilliance that drew the gaze of every room she entered. Her eyes, it was said, were the color of polished steel, her presence commanding yet serene. She rose to prominence as a lady-in-waiting to Isabel of Lorraine. But fate and beauty have a way of opening doors that even kings must notice. When she caught the attention of King Charles VII,
the weary monarch who had reclaimed France from chaos, she became not just his mistress, but his muse. To the courtiers, she was a scandal. To the artists and philosophers, she was a revelation. Agnès Sorel did not hide in the shadows as mistresses before her had done. No, she walked through the halls of power like light breaking through stained glass. And her fashion was her weapon. In an age when women were expected to dress modestly, to bury their beauty beneath layers of brocade and linen, Agnès appeared in gowns of shimmering silk, their square necklines plunging lower than any seen before at the French court. The world gasped. Her shoulders were bare, her décolletage framed with pearls and velvet. To some, she was indecent. To others, divine. The church condemned her fashion as vanity. Priests preached that temptation walked beside the throne. But still, the noble women of France began to imitate her. They reshaped their bodices, lowered their necklines, and followed her every move. Agnès had turned scandal into influence. Even the king himself defended her, for Charles saw in Agnès something far deeper than appearance. She gave him confidence, dignity, and some say even courage to rule. While the court whispered of sin, Charles VII called her his Lady of Beauty. And when artists painted her, they did so as if capturing a saint, not a courtesan. In truth, Agnès Sorel was more than a fashion icon. She was the first woman in European history to wield beauty as power, to turn style into statement, and to challenge a world that sought to silence her. Her image spread through France like wildfire, immortalized in the art of Jean Fouquet, and whispered through the corridors of every noble house. And so, the mistress became a legend. In a single decade, Agnès Sorel transformed not only how women dressed, but how they were seen. Her story was not of seduction alone, but of self-possession, defiance, and grace. In every stitch of silk, she declared, "I will not hide." The woman who shocked Europe did not just change fashion, she changed history. In the courts of Renaissance Europe, clothing was never just about beauty, it was about power. Every pearl, every thread of gold, and every line of fabric carried meaning, whispering silent messages to those who could read them. When Agnès Sorel appeared before the French court, her boldness wasn't only in what she revealed, but in what she dared to say without a single word. Her fashion choices echoed through the marble halls like a declaration that womanhood itself could be both sacred and sovereign. You see, in the 15th and 16th centuries, the body was political. It was the canvas upon which status, virtue, and divine favor were painted for all to see. In the iconography of the time, a woman's form symbolized far more than physical allure. It was a reflection of heaven and earth, of fertility, abundance, and life itself. Painters like Jean Fouquet and Botticelli didn't just capture women, they anointed them as symbols of cosmic harmony. Their skin, their posture, their garments, all woven into the spiritual lexicon of the age. to bare the neckline, to show the soft line of the chest, was not simply sensuality, it was a language. It spoke of fertility, wealth, and divine beauty, qualities long associated with the Virgin Mary and classical goddesses before her. Agnès Sorel's fashion didn't exist in rebellion against religion. It lived within it, blurring the sacred and the sensual. In a world that equated the divine with perfection, she embodied both the Madonna and Venus in one form. But not everyone saw it that way. The Church watched with growing unease. To them, the female form was a vessel of virtue, yet also a potential instrument of temptation. As Agnès stepped into power beside the king, she became a mirror reflecting society's contradictions. Was she an angel sent to inspire France's rebirth? Or was she the embodiment of pride and sin? The truth, perhaps, was both, and that's what made her so dangerous. Her exposed décolleté wasn't merely fashion, it was symbolism made flesh. In an age obsessed with allegory, her body became a stage for the battle between spirit and flesh, sin and sanctity, love and dominion. Within those glittering halls, nobles began to follow her lead, not out of desire, but ambition. To emulate Agnès Sorel's style was to align oneself with royal favor, to borrow her aura of divine charm. And thus her image multiplied, not in rebellion, but in imitation. Soon the women of the court began to understand fashion was power, visibility was influence, the body, their body, had become the crown's new language of control. Each gown, each carefully measured inch of silk carried the weight of both admiration and scrutiny. It was as if the court itself had become a living painting, a gallery of ambition and faith, of beauty and peril entwined. So when Agnès Sorel walked through the royal court, she wasn't simply adorned in silk. She was wrapped in politics, in theology, in myth. Her beauty became a manifesto, her fashion a revolution embroidered in gold thread. And whether by design or destiny, she revealed something larger than herself, that in the theater of power, the most dangerous weapon is not the sword, but the gaze it commands.
But you see, fashion, like fire, never stays contained for long. Once Agnès Sorel lit that spark in the French court, it wasn't just a passing flame. It spread, my friend, across borders, across kingdoms, across the very moral seams of Europe itself. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the open-bosom gown, what the poets of the time called le grand décolleté, had become the talk of courts from Burgundy to Florence and even London. Nobles and courtesans alike began to imitate the French ideal: low necklines, soft fabrics, and shoulders bare like marble statues. In England, the look arrived with whispers of the French disease, though they weren't speaking of illness, mind you, but temptation. Queen consorts and noble women began to lower their bodices ever so slightly, not to expose too much, no, but to hint. A whisper of collarbone here, a glimpse of silk underlace there. And in Italy, where art and anatomy were already in passionate dialogue thanks to men like Leonardo and Botticelli, this French fashion found fertile soil. Italian tailors perfected it, crafting gowns that sculpted the torso like marble, with bodices that seemed to breathe life into the body beneath. But not everyone approved, oh no. The moralists, the preachers and bishops took to their pulpits with fiery tongues. "Vanity!" they cried. "Sin draped in silk!" Sermons were written warning that such attire would invite not admiration, but damnation. There were even tales, apocryphal perhaps, of priests refusing communion to women dressed immodestly, their gowns deemed too close to heresy. In some parts of Burgundy and Spain, edicts were passed limiting how low a neckline could plunge. Yet the more the church forbade, the more creative the fashion became. Lace veils, transparent sleeves, and fine muslins replaced the overt exposure. But the suggestion of sensuality remained. The power of the gaze simply changed its form. Then came the Reformation, and with it a new wind of restraint. As Protestant ideals spread through Europe, the age of excess slowly began to wither. The same necklines that once celebrated fertility, health, and beauty were now seen as threats to the purity of the soul. In France, the death of Agnès Sorel and the turmoil that followed symbolized a turning point. Her daring had opened a door, but the century that followed began to close it, one stitch at a time. And yet, fashion has a memory. The décolleté never truly vanished. It merely rested, waiting for another era to rediscover its courage, waiting for the Renaissance, the Rococo, the Revolution, and the runways of centuries to come. So remember, dear listener, what began as one woman's bold choice became a continent's conversation, a dialogue between beauty and propriety, between body and soul. And in that dance, Agnès Sorel's legacy still lingers, not just in the silk and lace of history, but in every whisper of self-expression that dares to defy the rules.
In every century that followed, the spirit of Agnès Sorel lingered like a whisper beneath layers of silk and lace. Her daring neckline, once condemned, became the blueprint for elegance, inspiring 18th century courtiers, 19th century artists, and the designers who shape beauty today. From the royal court to the red carpet, the same question echoes. Who decides what a woman may reveal, and why must power be disguised as modesty? 5 centuries later, fashion remains a battlefield and a canvas where rebellion and grace walk hand in hand. The shock of the décolleté has softened, but the message endures. To own one's body is to reclaim one's voice. Agnès Sorel, the woman who changed the shape of history, reminds us that beauty, when chosen freely, is not vanity, it is power.